Prior to 1927, the Western Maryland Railway rostered 10 210 Decapods. Today, most railroaders will refer to these locomotives as Russian Decapods. However, that was not the case on the Western Maryland. Around Hagerstown, railroaders often called them Jew engines. Nobody seemed to know why, with obvious speculation being the engine's original construction for export to Russia, while others tied the locomotives to the Bolshevist Revolution. Crews operating out of Elkins, West Virginia simply called them Little 1100s. There was an obvious distinction from the huge I-2 class Decapods that shortly followed. The I-2s were a direct result of the success of the equally large H-9 consolidations. These consolidations were built in 1921 and 1923 with 61-inch drivers, 26 by 32-inch cylinders that were equally matched by a large boiler. The Western Maryland seek to improve train speed and tonnage handled by running faster while eliminating stops for fuel. New locomotives were needed, and they were needed to be able to operate over the entirety of the WM main line. Beginning in April of 1927, the first of the new I-2 class locomotives were delivered. Serial numbers 59947 through 59951 and 59986 and 59987 were delivered in April. 59998 through 60002, 60038, 60039, and 60049 were delivered in May, while 60053 through 60058 rounded up production in June. It is often argued that number 1120 was Baldwin's 60,000th locomotive and not the experimental demonstrator now housed in the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. The Baldwin Locomotive Works at their Mammoth, Eddystone, Pennsylvania facility, alongside the mechanical department of the WM, basically took an H-9 while maintaining the 61-inch drivers, adding a driver, and multiplied all the other important dimensions and characteristics by a third. The result was one of the most successful and heaviest designs of a decapod type ever built. The engines even came close to the legendary Pennsylvania Railroad's I-class 210s known as Hippos in tractive effort, but beat them in overall weight. With 30 by 32-inch cylinders and 225 pounds boiler pressure, as built, the I-2s were huge but incredibly basic locomotives. Drawbacks to the design included running gear, which was not well balanced as it was nearly impossible to run the I-2s at speeds above 40 miles an hour. The locomotive's massive weight was also an issue as well, considering at one time there was a general order that any time an I-2 slipped its drivers, the engineer had to report the milepost location and the local track crew was sent out to look for damaged or broken rails. This can be substantiated by an account that an engineer on the Tidewater sub got mad at a slipping I-2 and allowed it to continue to slip. Maintenance of way was not amused when they went out and found 13 sticks of rail that had to be replaced. The entire class was operated in pool service over the Reading between Lurgan and Rutherford, Pennsylvania. The Reading became increasingly frustrated with replacing damaged rails and once banned the I-2s from their railroad. The WM answered by banning the Reading's K-Class 210-2s from their railroad, and it didn't take long for both roads to determine it was better to put up with each other's locomotives than it was to lose territory. Despite these drawbacks, and in typical Wild Mary fashion, the road improved their decapods with new lightweight rods and rebalancing. Some locomotives even received disc drivers. The railroad also raised steam pressure from 225 psi to 240 psi, while other improvements included thermic siphons, a non-lifting injector paired with an exhaust steam injector, and improved lubrication systems. These improvements gained the class an additional 6,000 pounds increase in tractive effort. While never really sanctioned by the railroad, crews operating these behemoths soon found that the engines can now be operated at speeds of 45 and even 50 miles an hour, proving the I-2s were successful in the purpose of speeding up trains with heavier tonnage. Appearance-wise, the I-2s didn't change much over their 27-year careers, with the exception being paint. As delivered, they had just an engine number with a WM painted on the tender. The class was subsequently relettered between 1927 and 1941, with Western Maryland now displayed. The entire class received the 1941 adopted Fireball scheme shortly after being introduced, and the entire class of 20 engines lasted almost until the end of steam on the Western Maryland, with the last of the I-2s being retired in June 1954. Unfortunately, all of the I-2s were subsequently scrapped. However, their legacy lives on as one of the heaviest of their type and one of the most successful. Not bad for a locomotive design that was considered outdated when it was built.